Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in just about 1 minute. Today on the Writer's Bridge, we are going to be talking podcasts. Should you start a podcast? How? Why? How much time will it take? Or maybe you'd rather just be a terrific guest who gives fantastic interviews with quotable moments and intriguing conversations every single time. How much will it cost? Do you need special equipment? Do you need special clothing? What is this whole podcast thing about? And in just a moment, I'm going to introduce Brendan O'Meara. But first, I just want to tell you two quick things. If you are here for the first time, welcome to the Writer's Bridge. Welcome to the community. It is really, really lovely to have you. We are all here to build our creative platforms, but we call ourselves the Writer's Bridge because a platform is a thing you stand up on and yell at people from. But a bridge is a two-way connection where you reach your audience and your audience reaches back to you. I also want to let you know what Ashley and I did on our summer vacations was send out the Express Lane, which is our membership newsletter. Every Monday and Friday, Express Lane members get a tiny platform building task in their inbox. We want to share a couple of lessons with you, even if you're not a member yet. And so next week, you are going to get 2 free Express Lane lessons, one from me and one from Ashley. They will be useful even if you never join the Express Lane, because frankly, we are all about dishing out free stuff here on the Writer's Bridge. But if you do want to join, there's also going to be a welcome offer in there. And plus, when you join, you get access to the complete archive of all the Writer's Bridge episodes. If you just can't wait, you can check it out at thewritersbridge.com/expresslane, or it will just pop right into your inbox. Now, you may have noticed something different about my co-host this week. He is not a blonde marriage and sex influencer rocking a fantastic red lip. Oh no. This week it is Brendan O'Meara. Ashley is on sabbatical this fall, but we have some absolutely fantastic guests lined up to talk to you. So Brendan O'Meara is the founder and host of the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, which is the show where he talks to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. He's also an author himself. He wrote a fantastic book called 6 Weeks in Saratoga, How 3-year-old filly Rachel Alexandra beat the boys and became Horse of the Year, which I think really embodies that thing we sometimes talk about how with your memoir, you want an evocative title, 6 Weeks in Saratoga, and you want a subtitle that spells out exactly what people are going to read. You can learn more about Brendan. You can also sign up for his Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter at brendanomeara.com. Brendan, hello. Tell us who you are. Tell us what the heck you do and why you do it.
Well, what a thrill it is to be here amongst everybody on the bridge and be able to talk shop and just foster this amazing community that you and Ashley have ushered into existence. So what I do, I'm a writer and self-taught podcaster, self-taught audiophile, and it's I was the crucible that started the show. Like I was freelancing as I do a lot now. But the year was like 2013. And I was just feeling very like bitter and resentful and jealous of a lot of people who were like my peers who seemed to be on this sort of meteoric rise up the escalator to notoriety. And I was just festering just in the mud of writing these slideshows for Bleacher Report, like the winners and losers from the Daytona 500. Like that kind of thing. And I'm like, wow, geez, Wright Thompson for ESPN, the magazine's not doing this. Charles Bethea, who's a friend. I'm like, he's writing all these cover stories for like Outside Magazine. And I don't think he had to do any of these slideshows that I was doing. And so I was just like really in a bad sort of compare and despair mindset. And so at the time that, podcasting was starting to experience another wave. And I was inspired by the great Joe Donahue of WAMC Public Radio in Albany, New York. He has this show on the radio and also a podcast called The Book Show. And it's just where it's a celebration of reading and writers. And just this great show. So I really drew inspiration from that. I'm like, maybe I could just do that for nonfiction and creative nonfiction, because I had just recently earned an MFA in creative nonfiction from Goucher College. I was like, maybe I can do something that's really specific, where like my niche is just, it's a narrative journalism primarily, but also memoir and true storytelling. I'm like, oh, let me just maybe be able to maybe channel some of this resentment and these toxic feelings of jealousy into something that's more celebratory. And through
Brendan,
fits and starts.
were there already any creative nonfiction podcasts out there, or were you the first?
I was definitely one of the first. I would say there were three, and a long form. They got the jump on me in 2012, and to their credit, they have been going like every week since 2012. So I think they just crested like 500 interviews, and I'm at like 300. Like 333 will come out this Friday.
And
so
Brendan, you are like rolling in piles of cash, right? Like podcasting is incredibly profitable, isn't it?
I made last night, last month, brace yourself, $66 for the month for all my work and all my labor. And that's from 18 incredibly generous patrons from my Patreon page. So that is the pile of the Scrooge McDuck pile of wealth I swim in every month.
So why do you do it? So it's not for the cash. A lot of us are doing our creative endeavors not for the cash. Is it just love of doing it? How much is this building or creating audience or platform for you? Is this leveraging book sales? Tell us, Brendan, what's your motivation?
It definitely was. It was a way for me to definitely channel a lot of negative, awful feelings of that, like I said, that sort of toxic cesspool of jealousy into something more constructive, into something celebratory. I was like, maybe if I choose, instead of comparing myself to people, to have them on the show to unpack their routines, how they go about the work, how they deal with the ugly middles of drafts, how they deal with their own toxic feelings of jealousy and looking over their shoulder and comparing their race they're running to someone else's, who you don't know what leg up they might have had. You don't know what privilege they might have had. And meanwhile, you're comparing your ugly insides to the airbrushed outsides. And at a time when social media was really starting to glom onto the culture, was about when I was feeling the worst. And so this was definitely a community building exercise to celebrate writers telling true stories. And I liken the show to kind of like a rock festival, in that, you know, you'll have your big headliners up top. So you want to get the Laura Hillenbrands if you can, David Marinus, Howard Bryant, Andre Dubus III, and they're up there big. But then underneath all that, you'll see in all the little and smaller font, all these smaller bands who are every bit as good, but maybe not quite as popular. And you're able to drag those people into your stage on the momentum of a lot of those big heavy hitters. So I'm like, maybe I can get them in and we can start talking craft from the mid list all the way up to the headliners.
That's amazing. And I love that you talk to people at different places in their careers too. You've had me on twice. Thank you. And the first time I had get published in literary magazines, which was basically a pamphlet. And then you had me on again after I had done 7 drafts. So what makes you ask a guest yay, it's on your bookshelf. Thank you. What makes you ask a guest who is not a big deal yet?
Yeah. So I get a lot of pitches from publicists of authors I've never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And, so the title of their book might just be extremely fascinating. I'm just like peeking over at my shelf of like some of my like to read books down the line. And then, you know, there's one, well, he's been on the show in the past, but Ander Monson's Predator, a collection of essays that's coming out in a couple of weeks officially. And it's just like, if I get that comes across the transom, I'm like, oh, that sounds great. And then other times, as much as I don't like to hang out on social media that much, I do, you know, occasionally will bump into someone on Twitter who's either saying like, oh, my book's coming out, or someone else retweeted like, oh, my friend's book's coming out. I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool. And then I'll go through the process of finding out who their contact is. Oftentimes it's them directly, and be like, hey, you know, I host this little show, and, you know, I love to have you on, and, you know, here are some other people that have been on the show. This is kind of what we dig into. And if this is at all interesting to you, let's start a dialogue and we'll get the gears in motion.
So let's say that some of our Bridge community wanted to start a podcast. And actually, you know what? Pin that question because Martina just asked a great follow-up in the chat. So Brendan, do you book authors whose books are already out within like the past year, or are you only booking people before they have their book come out?
It's a combination sometimes for bigger name authors, if I get wind that they have a book coming out in like 3 or 4 months, I'll try to get that galley real fast and try to read it and have that in the can like a month or two ahead of time. Because when a big author like let's say a David Marinus, who's recent biography on Jim Thorpe, Path Lit by Lightning, just came out. He's the kind of guy who's going to be on C-SPAN. He's probably going to be on Fresh Air with Terry Gross when the book is like hot off the press. And I can't compete with that when the book is hot off the press, but I can compete before the media deluge starts, and I can get ahead of the curve. And that's how I get a lot of some of those bigger headliners on. And some people, their book might have been out for a few months and I just kind of stumble across it somehow. It's a lot of happenstance and sort of good luck when that happens. And oftentimes they're happy to come on and keep the long tail of their promotion going. Sometimes they're like, oh no, that came out a year ago, I'm already moving on to something else. And in which case, okay, fine. Well, keep me in mind when the new one comes out and we'll dig into it. So it's a combination.
I want to follow that up with a question of my own. Do you care whether the author has been traditionally published or whether they are self-published?
Yeah, I do care, just to keep the submission somewhat more manageable. I do try to traditionally published, even if it's just a rinky-tink press that's, as long as it falls under that umbrella of traditional, whether it be major publisher or small university press or small boutique press. Otherwise, it would be kind of unwieldy. I can only read about a book a week. That's about as fast as I can go. And I'm behind. My pile is taller than most people, and so it's hard for me to get through that pile. So if I lumped in the self-publishing as pitches, it would be prohibitive for me to get to any of the reading.
And I want to also point out something that I would point out if Brendan were not in the room. So Brendan, I'm going to honor you by saying what I would say behind your back, which is that Brendan is really educated in creative nonfiction and he really knows his stuff. He, however, does not know the name of every single press that is ever out there. And if you send Brendan a book with the name of a press on it, whether that is something that you have incorporated or somebody else has incorporated it, and the package is professional and the book cover is well designed and the writing is of quality, Brendan is probably not going to spend the bulk of his time double checking to see how big your publisher is before he decides whether or not your book is interesting enough to take a chance on. And I would say that about any podcast that is out there. If you are going to self or hybrid publish, this is why it's really, really important for you to have a professional looking package, whether you are spending your own money on it or whether your publisher is spending their money on it, because there are a million tiny presses out there, and it is possible to look professional and look like a small literary press, even if you have organized your own publication. And Brendan, if that did happen and you found out later, would you be like, crap, well, sorry, I can't have you on after all, you're self-published? Or if the book was good, would you be like, okay, yeah, I guess you kind of sucked me in on this one, but I like the book, so I'll do it. And please be honest with me on that, because if you would slap us down for that, let us know.
I do tend, if I haven't heard of the publisher, which is many, I do tend to look into it just to see, like, is this just to see its footprint? Are they doing professional work, or is it just some sort of hack industry? So I do tend to do a little extra legwork when it comes to vetting out that. But if I get a book that's really well written, professionally packaged, I can tell the person put in the work, put in the years. And if it's engaging, it's like, it truly is about the work. And if the story is awesome, and then, you end up being someone who can speak halfway eloquently about it and have a great conversation about what it means and why it's important to you, then, let's rock.
And I think that really is the thing, because I know that if you've been on the Writer's Bridge before, chances are really good that you have heard me say something along the lines of, don't wait for other people to give you permission. You have to give yourself permission. And if the level you want to be on is public speaking as a guest on podcasts that book traditionally published authors, then it's up to you to get yourself to a place where even if you're not publishing traditionally, they can't tell the difference because you are such a kick-ass guest. They are thrilled to have you. And I will slightly out myself here. And Brendan, I can't remember if we actually talked about this or not, but you interviewed me when Get Published in Literary Magazines was out there. And I self-published that. I mean, I incorporated the press. I purchased my own ISBNs. All of these are little things to show booksellers you're serious. They're not having to, buy copies of your book off Amazon. I had a professionally designed cover. It could hold its own with other books on the table. But I was also running the Brevity podcast at that time too. So I think that also helped in that I was building my audience without waiting for other people to give me permission to start talking to my audience. I gave myself permission. Brendan, you want to weigh in on that? It's not really a question, but I know you've got something cool to say.
Oh, for sure. And there are other ways too. Like if it's not just the book, like maybe you've got like a cool essay published on some online literary journal or something else that where you did have to knock on the door of a gatekeeper, that just gives you an extra level of credibility, even if that book or that collection of essays might be self-published. But if you had something on on Brevity's blog or an essay in creative nonfiction or fill in the blank, that just gives an extra layer of cred where it'd be like, okay, this thing right here might not be traditionally published, but you've proven you've played on other fields, and you can and that just further validates your enterprise. And another thing too about vouching for yourself, I didn't know this until a few years ago, but like as someone who writes a lot in the sporting world, like Best American Sports Writing and Year's Best Sports Writing now, I like long to get into that anthology. And oftentimes you feel like you need to be plucked to then be considered for that. My hunch is that most people are submitting their own work for it. I know I've had to. No editor that I've worked for was just like, oh, we're going to submit this on your behalf. It's writers that are like, oh, I think I have something that might be worth considering. Submit your work to it, because there's usually an address where you can mail in a submission, and then the series editor and then a guest editor might consider it from there. So you just have to be, to your point, like your own advocate and sticking up for your work. And it's not schlocky or anything. It's just like, oftentimes you're going to be your own cheerleader, and that's going to be that's just going to be true for really for most of us for the rest of our writing careers.
So that ties us into Lisa's question from the chat. What is included in a package that a publisher or a publicist or somebody submits to you to be on the podcast? What exactly do people send you? And I know we also have Allison Lane with us here today, who is a publicist. Maybe Allison, you could also post in the chat. What do you usually send out on behalf of your clients? So Brendan, what comes in a really great package?
I love it when the book comes. That's my favorite. And oftentimes through publicists starting to work with me, sometimes I reach out to them on first. I'm like, oh, there's a great book I'd like. And then when they send up me all the materials, I'll be like, hey, if you have any other nonfiction writers in your stable, just put me on your list. And that's how I've got a flux of stuff that's always coming in. So usually a bubble envelope that's got a paperback galley that hopefully is being published in like 4 months from now. So that gives me a lot of runway. But then there's usually an insert of some kind that's with some blurbs, Kirkus reviews, some prominent blurbs from comp titles, comp authors, and contact info, social media handles, the right contact person to reach out to in the event that you need to push it out to publicists and tagging the right people. So all those information that makes the lift on my end a little lighter, given that I'm going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of reading the entire thing and then doing reading the body of work of the author if possible, and digging into other interviews they might have done, and really crafting an interview that's going to feel like their time is well worth it. So anything that can make my lift a little easier is more than welcome.
And I want to point out one of the things that we've talked about in the past on the Writer's Bridge is this idea that you want to make it easy for the people who are going to promote you. If you are going to write a press release, write it in such a way that the overworked editor at the small town newspaper can copy paste that press release, and it is basically a story that is ready to go. If you are sending information to a podcaster, you want to listen to some episodes. You want to get a sense of who their audience is. If the podcast has advertising on it, go look at the advertisers' websites, which will show you something about who the advertiser thinks the demographic is. If they're advertising McDonald's and if they're advertising Mercedes-Benz, that is two separate audiences. Tailor your pitch to the podcaster in a way that shows, I am going to be a phenomenal guest. It's going to be really easy to talk to me. And I have something cool and new to say that your previous guests have not said, and yet that builds upon what it is that you're already doing. I am going to enhance and heighten while being part of your direct voice. Brendan, is that something that you find helpful?
Yeah, it can definitely be helpful. Some people try to get a little too over, like sort of, these are the things that I want to talk about. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's fine that you want to talk about that. But I have a way that I steer these conversations. And then if you say one thing that's really cool, that I'm just going to go off. I'm going to go there and start following the thread of the conversation. As Debbie Millman, who hosts Design Matters, someone I've had on the show a couple of times, and she sees an interview as like as billiards, like the balls are going to bounce certain ways, and it's up to me where to take it. And when you've done enough research, I kind of liken it to a quarterback reading a defense too. It's just like, I've done all this research. I know, based on what you're going to say, or based on what you're saying, I can go in different directions based on things you've said. I kind of just have a running note file on my monitor that's usually to my left. And so it's you can have all the talking points you want. It's great to have some degree of clarity that what you want to talk about, certain things you want to unpack. But oftentimes, if an interviewer is any good at all, they're not reading off a list of questions. They're really in the moment, and they want to. They'll follow where the conversation goes, and even follow up on some things if things are like, oh, I can tell you're holding back a little here.
I love that. I love that. Allison has weighed in the chat. This is Allison Lane, who's a book publicist. And she says, hi, everybody. I send a pitch letter with captivating thoughts on how to engage their audience, a link to your speaker package, including your bio, 3 headshots, suggested questions, topics, links to previous appearances and social links, and a bio that's written in reverse with your name last. And she has templates for all of that as well. She says, having your presentation to the podcaster in a way that makes them easy for them to say hell yes, and helps them better to engage their audience, and also let the podcaster know how you're going to promote your presence. Will you also write an article? Will you be doing a series of social posts or some quote tiles, or publishing your upcoming appearance in the newsletter? Because as Brendan said, he is not making bank out of this. So the more that this can be a mutual aid society, the more it's going to help everybody. Brendan, quick fire round here. We're going to dive a little more deeply again in a moment, but quick fire. Do you interview poets?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had Pulitzer Prize winner Jericho Brown on a couple of years ago. Mary Karr, who identifies primarily as a poet, though a lot of people here will probably be like, oh, yeah, definitely memoir writer. But she would tell you, I think she's a poet. Let's see. Aki Obejas was on last year, and just a few episodes ago, Alexandra Litton Regalado, who's Religienda, I believe, is her
Awesome.
collection of poets, because a lot of poetry is nonfiction. So I'm just like, okay, cool, you're under the umbrella. Let's see how you go about the work and tell your true stories in free form. And
I love that. That's a beautiful way to look at it, because you're right. So much poetry is nonfiction. Question from other Lisa. How do you feel about ARCs, advanced reader copies, in ebook form rather than PDF? Do you care ebook, PDF, paper? What do you like to get?
I prefer books because it's just easier on my eyes, but I tend to lean on e-galleys because they're super fast. It doesn't take any shipping, and it's and then I can highlight things and screenshot the page, and then I'll end up typing up that screenshot of things that I pull out. I yeah, like but I hate clutter as much as I love books and stuff of that nature. And but so I'm like 50-50. I really love the physical thing, but it just makes more sense to do the e-galley from just an expedition's point of view and a clutter point of view.
Great point. I love that. Michelle asks, she wants to interview a notable figure. His website has a contact page, but she doesn't want to get lost in the shuffle. What is your best strategy for contacting someone who's famouser than a direct message on Twitter?
Some of those people have their emails in their bios, their Twitter bios. If you do, I've had a lot of success going through those contact forms. I doubt they get as many messages as you think. So I would just go through that form. I've done that a lot with people, and that usually, depending on how big they are, sometimes that pings to their publicist, and then they'll reach out to you in a few days or weeks. It can be a while, so just be rigorous.
Love that. Okay, so let's slow it back down a little bit. I think we need to dive briefly into the technical. Like, I don't necessarily want to get into like the Rode versus Blue Yeti showdown here, but if we're going to be a great guest, I know we need a reasonably good sound. You clearly have a fancy microphone sitting in front of you. You're even wearing headphones. I have my fancy microphone in front of me, which is clipped to the ironing board in my hotel room because that's what was available. And every feminist should know how to use an ironing board. It's great for broadcasting. But what's about the minimum we need to spend below which you can go, regardless of brand? That microphone's probably crap. What's the bottom level there?
I would say I have this little microphone. It's like an ATR 2100 that I used before this guy I have, and I do want to upgrade this one soon because it's just what we do. But minimum requirement, and that little ATR 2100, I don't think they make that one anymore. But when I bought it a few years ago, it was like $65, and it sounds really, really good, especially when you put a little foam pop filter on it, because that way it takes away a lot of the peep pops, those plosives when you get way too close, that those hard sounds that end up clipping the audio. And clipping is when you're in the editing software and it just like totally like goes through the ceiling, and you often have to cut that out because it's just distorted beyond belief. So I would say, you're definitely under $100 to get a really decent selling microphone. If you can get it on a boom arm, all the better, because some people will tend to like bang or tap on the table. If you're mounted on the table, you'll get vibration through the mic. In a pinch, iPhone earbuds that have the wire and that little microphone, those are okay. As long as you're in, is what I like to tell people, to shrink and soften the room. So if you can record in like a little closet with a lot of clothes, and then if you have even just that iPhone earbud, the echo is gone and you actually sound like you're in a studio. It's not that bad. So the upfront investment to sound good is not that much. And you want that audio. And this is a great thing that Brad Listy told me from Other People podcast. He's been doing it since 2012. It's you want the audio to age well on the internet. So like we Brad and I do a lot of evergreen interviews. So in 5 or 10 years, the interview that you and I had, Allison, for when 7 Drafts came out, like I still want that one to sound pretty good. And I think it will, because you invest in that audio, because in 5 years, the listeners are going to be all the more savvy. And if you have a real tinny, echoey thing, it's like, that's just distracting. So just investing in something, a microphone that doesn't take a whole lot, it'll go a long way towards making you sound professional. And if the audio sounds nice and warm, then people can really focus on the wisdom of your insights instead of, oh man, that is just really bad on my ear.
And this is something where I sure am catering to public perceptions, but I always set my microphone to make me sound a little darker and a little lower. And I like to, when I'm being a guest, I like to bring on my radio voice. We've got some traffic on the I-5 today. You got to watch out for that malfunction junction, because it really does help you sound like you are someone to take seriously. And it is a stereotype. And I'm okay for right now with buying into that stereotype a little bit with my audio. I'm not a super high pitched person, even in person, but we all tend to pitch up a little bit when we're nervous. And it helps if your sound system is helping pitch you down just a little bit. Brendan, what recording platform do you use? I use Hindenburg, which I found to be very easy to use, and it's designed for podcasters. Before that, I used Apple's, what did we call it? iMusic, Music Studio. What was it on Apple?
GarageBand.
GarageBand, thank you, which was terrible and awful and really bad and ate a lot of my recordings. So what platform do you use and what do you recommend?
Let's see. I started off using Audacity, which is a free program, and that was pretty good. I learned the basics of it, but I use Hindenburg Journalist Pro, and I love it to death. It's so good. It levels things nicely, and leveling is just, if I'm coming in hot and someone else is coming in low, it evens out the sound. So then you don't need to have a professional sound engineering degree to get things to sound nice on the ear for a listener. So that's something called a DAW, or a digital audio workshop, or workflow or something. It's called the DAW, DAW. So that's what I edit in, and I also record myself locally to Hindenburg when I'm doing something like this. My phone calls, if you will, 99.9% of all my podcasts are remote. I use Zencastr. And that one, what's nice about Zencastr is that it records locally to each person on a separate track. So that way I can pull in the two tracks and I can sync them up and then edit them accordingly. So in case if someone like just totally sneezes into the microphone, I can like separate it out. I can mute that one section so you would never know what's happening. And because it records locally too, if there's a slight hiccup in the internet connection and we start getting that robot sound between us and our connection, it's actually still recording like perfectly on your end. So you don't hear like boing, like what would happen with Skype. So it's always recording a nice file on your end. And then I download, it goes up to the cloud, I download that, and then I can pull it into Hindenburg, sync up those tracks, and then I can edit accordingly. I sync them up, awesome. Lock them up so I can edit and delete and so forth, and they all sync up.
I love that. I really love that. And Jennifer adds a tip in the chat, which is many libraries offer podcast rooms or small recording studios these days. So that is also worth checking out. I want to dive a little bit into what makes a good guest and how do we become guests. So let's start with how do we become guests? Cheryl asks, is there a place writers can go to search for podcasts who are looking for authors and writers? Is there a specific site or platform? Heather asks a really similar question to that, which is how do you get booked for podcasts? Do you just look up podcasts that seem relevant to your passions and interests and then pitch yourself? Is there a better way to network? Tell us, Brendan, how do we get on podcasts?
There is kind of like a dating website for producers and wannabe guests as well. I think it's called Podmatch. They kind of courted. They go out and find all kinds of hosts and they go out and court. I'm like, okay, I'll sign up for this. Didn't end up working out for me. I didn't really lean into it because I really have no shortage of guests just based on I get pitched a lot. And I know just based on author catalog, publisher catalogs, I know what's coming out several months in advance. So I'm always kind of already thinking that far ahead. But that's an option. If you're a guest and you want to line up, if you're a writer, you can probably type in various like dating terms and be like, all right, well, let's have a match. And so that's one way to do it. If you listen to, let's say you like the long form podcast, odds are if you click on like listeners who listen to this, like this, you'll probably find mine. You'll probably find a few other ones. And that way, it's like Amazon, like you purchase this, you might like this. And so it's similar to podcasts. So that way you start to grow the tree of we talk about comp titles and book proposals and memoir, like comp podcasts. And this is how you can get in front of other audiences who have audiences that are similar to your niche, and that you are going to align with them. So you're not wasting anyone's time. If you're a fantasy writer, find the fantasy pods, and that so you don't want to go on a sports podcast unless, of course, you're writing about fantasy football or something. But that's an entirely different thing altogether.
Hillary says she has had success with podmatch.com and finds it very easy to navigate. I've tried Matchmaker and found it doesn't really have a lot of writing podcasts on it. And Allison Lane suggests look on listennotes.com or chartable.com. And this is really great advice from Allison, and advice that I would give you as well. Don't necessarily look for a book or writing podcast, although those are great too. Look for your themes. If you are writing about kids or parents or dogs, who is talking about those things that are bigger than your book's plot, unless your audience is specifically other writers. I also found I listen to podcasts on an app called iCatcher. I put writer and book, and I would, put my themes if I was writing with different themes into the search, downloaded like 2 episodes a piece of podcasts that were current and still coming out. And then I just listened and thought, okay, who seems really quality? Who would I actually like to be on? Really good question from Lynn. Actually, you know what? Let's come back to that in just a second, and let's stay on guests for a moment here. So, Brendan, what makes a great guest? Why would you go like, oh yeah, that was fabulous. I'm so glad I got that person. Can't wait till they write another book so I can have them back.
Yeah, a great guest has done some homework on their own too, where they've listened to to the show. They kind of know the flow, they know the tone. A guest is someone who's just, they're coming to play ball. They're just, I'll never forget when like Elizabeth Rush came on the first time. She ended up being a Pulitzer finalist in nonfiction for her book on rising. It's about the American seashores and sea level rise. And she came on, you would have thought that I was, Terry Gross or something. She came on and she was just so charming and so funny. And we just had like such a good chemistry, and like she just leaned into every dumb question I asked her, and it was just so fun. And she laughed, and we were cracking jokes. It was like really engaging. That was like episode 71 or something, and it was like way early on in the run of the show. So if a guest is just coming on, just ready to play ball, because you never know who's listening, and you never know who might buy a book and then might become just a lifelong fan of your work, just based on the energy you bring and what some little glimmer of insight that you brought to the show that is going to is inject or syringe value into someone's writing life. Like, I never thought to approach that in that particular way. I didn't realize if I just set a timer for 10 minutes a day, I can get a lot done. And it's like, it might be something that never quite occurred to you, but if someone just comes and they're like, yeah, let's get into this, let's play, then you might be making a fan for life.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think that's true for just about any interview that we do. You've got to act like your interviewer, even if they are currently at the Podunk Times, that at some point in the future, they are going to be a Pulitzer Prize winner, and you want them to remember you as someone who was awesome to interact with. Is there a difference between a podcast and a written interview or a written profile?
Oh, for sure. Oftentimes with the written ones, those are sort of truncated and edited for clarity, even more so than like the pure audio. So if you went through a transcript, and things will get undeniably repetitive at some point. And if it's on the ear, it's totally fine. You kind of skim over it. But if you were reading probably everything that I'm saying, you would see all my verbal tics, which I tend to say, a lot. Yeah. I've fortunately, listening to myself for 10 years doing this podcast, I've been able to sort of edit. I say sort of a lot. I haven't been able to edit that out of my verbal tics yet, but ums and ahs, I've been able to self-edit somewhat. to some degree, but I do say, I do say sort of a lot. I see it in the transcripts and I hear it every time I sit down to edit my voice. So it's good training for that. But yes, the printed interviews are often those things are edited out and tightened up. So you really get, a reduced sauce instead of a watered down version of just 28-ounce can of tomatoes without any flavor. Gotta reduce that sauce.
I love that. I managed to weed out of my voice when I was podcasting and teaching. However, I seem to have replaced it with a little like clucking sound that I make sometimes. And now I'm trying to cut that one out too.
I can usually see those. I can edit those. A lot of people have a lot of verbal tics. I call snaps, or like I know someone I interview a lot. She will just be like, and I can see the waveform. Like I can see it coming a few seconds. I'm like, oh, I'm like, here we go, clip. And it'll be like 100 of those in an hour. I'm like, oh, here we go. But that's what you do. That's what you do to make it a good listener experience.
I love that. And Andromeda recommends an app called Orai, O-R-A-I, or maybe that is Oral, O-R-A-L. So just clarify for us, Andromeda, which helps you record and practice speaking and delete some of your tics. It also lets you know if you have enough verbal liveliness, variation in pitch, etc. She says it's called Orai.
Allison, it's O-R-A-I.
O-R-A-I. O-R-A-I. Fantastic. Love that. And so that can be useful. Allison Lane ticks in, why was her bio written in reverse? It's so that the script can be for the podcaster where this says the person's name last. Here he is. He's a prominent creative nonfiction podcaster and all around great guy. We love his Metallica t-shirts. Brendan O'Meara, lets them bring you in like a wrestler there, which is kind of fun. So tell us, what is a terrible guest? What do people do that makes you go, oh Lord, I can't believe I booked you. I am never having you back. I am suffering in silent pain. Let's hope I can pull this interview out.
Yeah, it's kind of the flip. I say kind of too a lot. So here we go. There's 3 big verbal tics. It's the opposite of the guest who is present and showing up to play ball. Some guests, they just see it as a way to truly promote the one thing that they're here to do, and I'll ask questions, and oftentimes they're very short. They won't elaborate. When I'm interviewing someone, I will read back things that really stuck out to me in their book or something, and then they'll fail to engage. They fail to elaborate on it, and sometimes it's not always a question. It'll just be like, I read this, and be like, that was it. Just an incredibly, that thing just gutted me, man. And then they'll just be like, yeah. And I'm like, well, damn it. Well, I got to cut this whole question out and cut that answer out now in the edit. I'm like, well, that's going to happen. And sometimes they just don't sound like they're having fun. I'm like, and they're not bringing anything to the audience. They're just kind of talking about the things they want to talk about. It's like, these things, people have such a finite amount of time in a week. And I'm asking you for an hour of your time to listen to my little podcast that could. The guest has got to bring some heat, because I try to get out of the way as much as possible. My job is to really shine the light on you and make you shine, and celebrate your work, celebrate your book, get people excited for what you do. And if you can't even bring that modicum of excitement to your own work, like, this thing's just not going to work. I've never had to kill an episode because of it, but I've had to heavily edit some episodes, take them down from an hour to almost 30 minutes because the other 30 minutes was bone dry.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephanie Weaver points out too that the other thing she's found with guests is people who have all long answers and no short answers, so that as a host, I can't break in without interrupting them. Yeah. Jennifer asks another question. For being a guest, what do you do when the host asks a question that wasn't in the pre-interview? So Jennifer, I've done a bunch of podcasts, both as a host and as a guest, and I have never done a pre-interview. The only time that's ever happened is when I interviewed Ander Munson for my very first Brevity podcast, and the recording didn't work, and we had to do the entire thing over again the next night. And I was so just embarrassed that I was asking this guy for more time. Mostly it's about knowing your subject and being comfortable enough in your subject to be able to just talk about anything. And Allison Lane points out in the chat, I love podcasts where people talk about the big picture and how their work or their mission or their message translates to what people need in the world, not here's what's in my book. Please buy my book. Don't you want to buy my book? They're not listening to a podcast to listen to a commercial. Trust that they're going to get to know you. Like we've said before on the Writer's Bridge, nobody wants to be your customer. They want to be your friend. Brendan?
I remember several years ago when I think it was Boyhood, that the Richard Linklater movie came out. And I remember just the story behind that movie was more riveting than the movie itself. The fact that it was filmed over 10 years. And I remember talking to Maggie Messett, a friend of mine in the early run of the show, about the podcast as a form to really highlight the personality. Because if we can really glom onto the personality and say that that's someone I really want to hang out with, then they're going to read your book. But we don't need to like talk about your book and everything. I do that anyway because it's topical and germane. But if we can get people just really like in love with you, then we don't have to talk about the book at all. They're like, oh cool, like I spent this time on a podcast with this person, now I'm going to go spend some time with their books. So yeah, I would say that's really true. The pre-interview stuff, I don't do that. I don't send questions to people unless they've never been interviewed before and they're real nervous. I'll be like, this is kind of what I like to unpack if you want to study up ahead of time.
I love that. So we have a great question from Lynn that we're going to come to, which is all about how do you let people know you exist? And I think that's going to be relevant for us as writers as well. We are going to come back to that question, as well as 3 things that you can do today to forward your writing/podcasting career right after breakout rooms. In the breakout room, we discovered that Brendan has an audience of about 2,000 or 3,000, that he uses the hosting platform Libsyn, Libsyn. And we also mentioned transom.org, which is a great place to find podcasting training, audio tutorials. And for those of you who are just writing memoir, they have a really great set of tutorials on interviews and like how to do a good interview that is not adversarial with a person who you are strongly opposed to their views, which is sometimes a way to treat Aunt Martha, as an adversarial interview. And so highly recommend that. The other thing that Lynn asked right before we departed into breakout rooms was, how do you let people know you exist, Brendan? Do you advertise your podcast? Do you depend on word of mouth? What lets people know the Creative Nonfiction podcast is out there? It's awesome, and you should listen to it.
Yeah, one way, of course, is through your social media channels. Otherwise, being a guest on other podcasts, and because if you're a guest on other podcasts, there are podcast listeners who plug into that audience, and you're like, okay, you already get people who are already, the friction of listening to another podcast is very low. Then there's when I push out a new episode, I always share various links and social assets as sort of like a mini press kit with that author. And I'm just like, listen, in the very likely event that our audiences on social do not completely and 100% overlap, here are some things that are worth sharing to you. Because if I'm a Mary Karr fan, you're probably not going to find her interview by following me. But if she was nice enough, and she wasn't, but if she was nice enough to share her interview with her 60,000 followers, then her fans would be able to engage with the interview. Yeah, maybe I'd get a little bump in listenership, but it's truly about like fans of you want to hear you. So if you can help share in the promotion, that helps grow the footprint and it just helps kind of grow the footprint.
Awesome. I love that. So we are getting near the end of our time, and we do always try to end on time. If we are very lucky, Brendan might stay with us for another couple of minutes and just let us know about anything else that he is doing or that he has questions. Brendan, what's upcoming for you that we should totally know about and understand and tune in for?
Well, let's see. Well, for members of the Patreon page, I've been making cool buttons, and that's the lightning bolt lightning bolt of my logo. So patrons get a little button. That's kind of cool. But this Friday, I've got Malika Gharib, who's she's got an incredible graphic memoir coming out. I love graphic memoirs. Those are really cool. Those seem to be kind of coming along. And It Won't Always Be Like This is the title. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful book. So that's pretty much what that's coming this Friday. And then Sonia Huber, her new book, Voice First, Writer's Manifesto, is coming out. I'm interviewing her on Thursday. It'll probably be next Friday's episode. So a lot of people here probably know Sonia. So yeah, those are two that are in the hopper. And of course, there's 300 plus of these things in the backlog that I think it's overwhelming. So on my website, I actually have like a greatest hits from 0 to 100, 101 to 200, and then 201 to 300. So there can be like, oh, there's 30 that are like kind of the greatest hits. Be like, oh, that might be a good starting point for a lot of people who might be overwhelmed by the titanic weight of the backlog.
I love it. I love it. We're going to ask you as well, just in just a moment, to let us know where we should pitch you if we want to pitch, as well as 3 things that you can do today to get your podcasting in gear as a guest or as a host. Please do forward the replay of this to a writer friend. Everybody is welcome, and we'll sign them up for the list whenever they want to sign up for the list. We also invite you to join us for our next episode, which is September the 20th. And we're going to have on Jenny Nash, who is the CEO of Author Accelerator. And Jenny and I have both been doing a lot with email lately. And I have been seeing these amazing results on email, which is totally weird because like somebody knew that I was doing a retreat in Portugal next May. And even though I don't have dates or an itinerary or a final price, they sent me a deposit, which was just weird, but kind of also like the power of email, because it really is people inviting you into their inbox. They trust you more in their inbox. We're going to talk about easy ways to build your list, even if you are starting from 0 people. And for those of you who are further along in your emailing plan, we're going to talk about drip campaigns and ways that your list can build your audience and get your work out there and maybe even start making some money. So, Brendan, 3 things that people can do today. Why don't you give one and I'll give one, and the third one will be how to pitch you. Sure.
I would say first thing, as writers, you're always taught to, well, eventually you start to learn to read like a writer. In audio, I would say start to listen like a producer. So you're starting to notice for verbal tics. Maybe you can even sense when the producer made an edit. You can start to learn how to edit yourself down while you're talking. Start to hear your verbal tics, and you can get those down. So I would say listen like a producer. Pay attention to how guests are answering, especially really media savvy ones that give these almost tweetable answers. That way they're not monopolizing the microphone time.
I love that. I always try to have 3 things that I'm ready to say, something meaningful that is like a real outreach to the audience that's really heartfelt, something funny that is a joke that I know will land because I've said it before, and something that is surprising, something that is new and different and counterintuitive. And you can listen to your comp authors, the people who you would like to be shelved next to, on their podcasts as guests. Listen to them across a couple of podcasts and listen for what stories they repeat. What do they have in their pocket that they are ready to serve up in a practiced but still natural feeling way every time? So, Brendan, before we say goodbye, how do we pitch you if we want to be on the Creative Nonfiction Podcast?
Best way is to pitch emails to Creative Nonfiction Podcast at gmail.com. And then you have to be quite nimble on the keyboard. That's a lot of words, a lot of characters. But that's the best way to send me a pitch to be on the show. And I might also add one other little key, if you're an interviewer too, is to have a good internal shot clock and to not be too overly wordy, and don't answer, ask. So don't ask and then answer the question for them and ask again, or ask an entirely different question. Ask the question, get out of the way.
I love that. And that's also great if you're moderating a panel, if you're interviewing somebody in a library or having a talk in a bookstore. These are techniques we can use from all over the place. And podcasting is a fantastic way to reach your audience, whether you are a host or a guest. If you're a host, think about welcoming your guests to your beautiful party. If you are a guest, be a great party guest. We are so glad to have you here. We will include Brendan's contact information in the follow-up email as well. Please do share that with another writer, and please unmute yourselves for a joyful goodbye, or you can stick around for a few minutes if you have more questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Unmute
you.
yourself to say
Bye.
bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
This was
Bye.
awesome.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Can I ask one quick question?
Totally.
Sure.
What's your question?
My question is, if I'm doing my audiobook and I'm recording from home, don't worry, I have a sound studio set up. My partner's a musician, but we want to get a new mic. Is there a mic that you would recommend that would double for audiobook and podcasting?
The MB7 by Shure, I think, is the industry standard for the best. That's what Allison has. That's what I want to upgrade to. That's the one. Yeah.
Okay.
I love
Thank
it.
you.
And it was not outrageously expensive. I think I bought it on Amazon.
Yeah, I think it's right around 400.
Okay.
I think I
Depending
paid less than that. Maybe it's
Nice.
maybe it's like gone up. Maybe they've done another edition or something like that. I feel like I paid like $297 or something like that.
Yeah, that
Awesome.
one's the one. I think even if you had it, it's a little spendy, and maybe there are comparable ones that are cheaper. But if it makes you feel a little more professional, then I think there's some stock in having something that makes you feel a little more pro. And a lot of the high end podcasters with Titanic audiences, that's the Cadillac of microphones right now.
Yeah, and Carolyn recommends B&H Photo, which is a great online store for gear and equipment. And I
That's
also
where I got
buy
mine
from Sweetwater Sound. Brendan, any particular headphones you recommend?
Yeah, these are Audio Technica by Audio Technica. I don't know the exact model, but these are amazing headphones. Allows me to hear weird things in the background.
My Bose headphones, but you don't want noise canceling headphones for podcasting. They just make your ears feel weird after a while. And I will also link all of this gear in the follow-up email as well, so that you can easily find it and assess.
I think these are $60 a few years ago, and I take good care of them, so they've been great. And I have a little audio interface, a Scarlett, Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, so I can plug in 2 XLR cables. So if I actually have a guest in studio, I can do that's my interface. That'll go right into my DAW on the computer.
What kind of arm do you recommend? The thing that it's hanging
The boom
from?
arm? Yeah, this is just it's by Heil. It's an HB1 microphone boom, and B&H Audio is where I got this from, and my little microphone here, which is the Heil PR40. And it's a nice little serviceable mic, especially after I put my audio through Hindenburg. It makes my tone sound pretty warm. It's not like A+, but I'd give it a good solid A-.
My boom arm is by Rode, Rode. And anything you're buying from Audio Technica, from Rode, or from Shure, which is spelled with an H, Shure, they are reputable, solid brands, and pretty much everything they sell you is going to be of good quality. I also have a Shure MV88, which is a little tiny microphone that plugs into my phone directly. And I can get pretty good quality sound on the run. I did some interviews at Hippocamp a couple of years ago for the Brevity podcast, and I was able to interview people in a crowded lunchroom and still get decent enough sound to make it be in the podcast. So I'm a big fan of the Shure products as well.
Other little tips that I think are helpful for being a guest and especially in interviews, since you're always going to be like on the mic, is having good mic awareness. Allison, as a performer, definitely can get this. You don't want to be way up on it and you're going to totally clip out the audio. You don't want to be smacking your lips. If you're going to swallow, like, go around that, because you don't want your Adam's apple mic'd up, and you don't want to eat. Oh my God. I've heard people eat like just right into the mic. It's disgusting. All these mouth sounds are nasty. You don't want that.
Fun tip for recording your audiobook. You will make mistakes, and that's okay. They will be edited out. The fastest way for your audio editor to find them is, here I am reading my audio, blah, blah, blah. Oh, crud, I made a mistake. Here I am reading my audiobook, and that clap shows up as a sharp peak in the visual of the sound waves, and it makes it very easy to find your mistakes. It will save your editor hours of searching for mistakes.
But for about an hour interview, in terms of research and reading and the interview and then the editing, for about an hour, I'm pretty skilled at it now. It's anywhere between 15 to 20 hours of labor for one hour interview. Just to give you an idea of how, when you're in it, it's a bit of time, and that includes, promoting it too. And I have evergreen interviews, so I'm always picking things from the backlog to put up to refresh it. But about 15 to 20 hours for just a simple hour interview.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much. I know there's a couple of people here who want to ask me about my upcoming webinar, so stick around for a second. I'll tell you about that and about Memoir Bootcamp. Brendan, you have been so fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. And I have a sneaking suspicion that you're going to see a bunch of pitches in your inbox.
If I don't get to it, it's not because I'm not interested. It's because there's just a whole lot there, and I can only read about a book a week. So I have to be pretty judicious between new guests, old guests, headliners, and those mid-listers. So you always have to kind of juggle all that. I also try to diversify the backlog too, and give underrepresented voices their time to shine also. So there's all the things that are in the stew.
Love that. Thank you. Well, feel free to stick around if you like Brendan, and feel free to bail out if it's time to bail out. I'm so grateful to have you.
Excellent. Yes, I do have to bail, but this was truly a thrill and a joy. So thanks so much for having me, Allison. And thanks so much for all the wonderful questions from the audience. Best of luck out there as a guest and podcast with everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Lisa, you wanted to know about the upcoming Memoir Bootcamp thing. So I've got a webinar coming up next week, which is Pitch, Publish, and Get Paid, which is all about submitting op-eds, essays, how to write a commercial pitch, where to find editor emails, that kind of stuff. Then in October, November, I've got a 3-session webinar called Memoir Bootcamp that's going to take people through planning their memoir and how it's going to sell, and then plotting out the memoir based on that plan. And this can be done either with a revision or with a first draft. There'll be writing exercises in between the 2 weeks. In between the 3 weeks, and a workbook with, different exercises to do. The goal is that when you come out of the other end of the boot camp, you'll have your synopsis, a really solid opening, a really solid ending, and a strong sense of everything that's going to go in the middle. And then there's also a premium level where each week I meet with 8 writers, just 8, and we talk through the exercises they did and review them and do live editing of their pages and answer their individual questions, and also hot seat them for talking about their platform and how their book is going to sell. Those are all over at Jane Friedman, janefriedman.com. And if you want to check them out, they're in her list of events and classes, and I'll tag them in the follow-up email. But I would love to see any of you there. Yeah, Lisa.